Okay, Revelation chapter 13. You should each have one of these folders. So right on the front page there, beginning in verse 1 of chapter 13, it says, "And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy." So here we have a beast coming up out of the sea. Now, if you look at the last quote on that front page, on the second column, under related Bible passages at the bottom, it says, "These great beasts," this is in reference to Daniel chapter 7, which we'll look at in a moment here, "these great beasts which are 4 kings which shall arise out of the earth." So that tells us that a beast in prophecy represents a king. And if you go to the next page at the top, it says, "Thus he said," and this is verse 23 of Daniel 7, "Thus he said, the 4th beast shall be the 4th kingdom upon earth." So a king or a kingdom is represented by the beast, by a beast. So in chapter 13 of Revelation, in verse 1, where we have a beast rising up out of the sea, we would have here a kingdom, a king or a kingdom that would be arising. Now, before we go any further in looking at this beast, which is really going to be the subject of our whole time tonight, before we really get into it, let's get an overview of where we are in the book of Revelation. You remember from our first night, we saw the chiasm, or the mirror structure of the book of Revelation, where the first half of the book is historical, and the second half of the book is eschatological, or having to do with end-time events. And we're right now in this section called the War Against Error. We've been looking at that we looked in our fourth night about the trumpets, the 7 trumpets. And then we looked at this little book that was opened in chapter 10 and in chapter 11, the 2 witnesses. Well, that is the historical section of the chiasm. When we get to chapter 13, which is what we're looking at tonight, we're beginning the second section. And so chapters 13, 14, 15, and 16 have to do with, again, this continuing war against error. Now, just to give you an overview of the last half of the book, we've looked at this slide on an earlier night, but in chapter 13, we have 2 beasts, a beast from the sea and a beast from the earth. Chapter 14, we have 3 angels' messages, followed by the harvest. Chapter 15 and 16 are the 7 last plagues. 17 and 18 is the fall of Babylon. Chapter 19 is the second coming of Jesus. Chapter 20 is the 1,000 years. And chapters 20 and 21 are the new earth. So this is a sequence, it's a progression, a linear progression of time, starting in history and moving into the future. So with that in mind, here we have in Revelation chapter 13 this beast coming up out of the sea. And to give us the context for this, let's go to the first passage under related Bible passages right across the way there. And this is Daniel chapter 7. And we've got the first few verses of Daniel chapter 7. It says, "In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed. Then he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matters. Daniel spake and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven strove upon the great sea." And remember, the Mediterranean Sea is also known as the Great Sea. Sometimes you see maps that have it labeled that way. So these beasts, or which represent kingdoms, would come up out of this part of the world. And we also talked about how sea is a symbol for the populated area of the world at that time, where there was many different nations and kingdoms come together. So 4 beasts coming up from the sea, diverse or different one from another. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth, and made stand upon the feet as a man. And a man's heart was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second like to a bear. And it raised up itself on one side, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it. And they said thus unto it, Arise, devour much flesh. And after this I beheld, and lo, another like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl, and the beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I saw in the night seasons, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. And it devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it. And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Now, as we looked at this when we were studying in our Daniel seminar, we identified these 4 beasts as Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome, represented by the lion, the bear, the leopard, and this 4th beast. So those are the 4 kingdoms that would arise out of the earth. Now, going back to Revelation chapter 13, notice what we see in verse 2. This is this beast in chapter 13 of Revelation. Verse 2 says, And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion, and the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. So here we have those same animals, a lion, a bear, a leopard, and a dragon. And often the 4th beast of Daniel 7 is painted as a dragon. And so we could identify that 4th beast as a dragon perhaps. So this beast in Revelation chapter 13 is a composite, has elements or characteristics of Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. It kind of inherited all those characteristics from those different kingdoms. Furthermore, it says that the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. Now, if the dragon, we will see in a later study how the dragon can be identified as Satan. But the dragon, in this case, when we're looking at kingdoms, the dragon can be identified with Rome, the 4th of those kingdoms. So lion, bear, leopard, dragon, we can call the 4th beast a dragon. So if the dragon represents Rome, the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. So in order to identify this beast in Revelation chapter 13, we're going to see a number of identifying characteristics which are going to help us out, but it's got to be a power that received its power, its seat, and authority from Rome. And so the question would be, to whom did imperial Rome give its power, its seat, and great authority? That would tell us who this beast is, because Revelation 13:2 says that the dragon gives him his power, his seat, and great authority. So whoever the Roman Empire gave its power and seat and authority to, that's who this beast would be. So before we read on in the further identifying characteristics, we can answer this question from history. We have several historical statements here that let's look at that tell us the answer to that question, who it was that imperial Rome gave its power and seat and great authority to. This is from the History of the Christian Church, Volume 3. It says, when the Western Empire fell into the hands of the barbarians, the Roman bishop was the only surviving heir of this imperial past. Or, in the well-known dictum of Hobbes, the ghost of the deceased Roman Empire sitting crowned upon the grave thereof. So that's the bishop in Rome became the heir of the Western Empire. Here is another reference from the book The Rise of the Medieval Church, Alexander Flick. It says, the removal of the capital of the empire from Rome to Constantinople in 330 left the Western Church practically free from imperial power to develop its own form of organization. The Bishop of Rome, in the seat of the Caesars, was now the greatest man in the West. So it's clear that the Western Church, and particularly the Bishop of Rome, was now sitting in the seat of the Caesars. Here's another one from the same author. It says, the mighty Catholic Church was little more than the Roman Empire baptized. Rome was transformed as well as converted. The very capital of the old empire became the capital of the Christian empire. The office of Pontifex Maximus was continued in that of the Pope. And then this one, which is from the book What is Christianity by Adolf Harnack. It says, whatever Roman elements the barbarians and Arians left came under the protection of the Bishop of Rome, who was the chief person there after the emperor's disappearance. The Roman Church, in this way, privately pushed itself into the place of the Roman world empire, of which it is the actual continuation. The empire has not perished, but has only undergone a transformation. That there is no mere clever remark, but the recognition of the true state of the matter. Oh, so let me just read that again. That is no mere clever remark, but the recognition of the true state of the matter historically, and the most appropriate and fruitful way of describing the character of this church. It still governs the nations. It is a political creation and as imposing as a world empire because the continuation of the Roman Empire. The Pope, who calls himself King and Pontifex Maximus, is Caesar's successor. So let's look at this with that identification in mind, that this successor of the Roman Empire is the Roman Church and its bishop, the Pope. So let's go now to our next page and see a little bit about how this developed. If you go to the middle of the first column on page 22, we have a quotation there from 2 Thessalonians 2, verses 1 through 4. And Paul writes here, now we beseech you, brethren, by the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, and by our gathering together unto him, that ye be not soon shaken in mind, or be troubled, neither by spirit, nor by word, nor by letter as from us, as that the day of Christ is at hand. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. We'll talk about that part of it a little bit later. But what Paul is saying here is that there would be a falling away in the Christian church. Notice the next reference from Acts chapter 20. Paul is here meeting with the elders of Ephesus in Miletus. And it says here in Acts 20, verse 17, and from Miletus he sent to Ephesus and called the elders of the church. And when they were come to him, he said unto them, take heed therefore unto yourselves and to all the flock, over which the Holy Ghost hath made you overseers, to feed the church of God, which he hath purchased with his own blood. For I know this, that after my departing shall grievous wolves enter in among you, not sparing the flock. Also of your own selves shall men arise, speaking perverse things, to draw away disciples after them. So here Paul is like in 2 Thessalonians, where he said there was a falling away or an apostasy. Here he's saying that after I'm gone, grievous wolves shall come in among you, and of your own selves. Now he's speaking to the elders of the church. So he's saying, among you guys, the elders of the church, shall men arise speaking perverse things. So the church would experience a corrupting process that would take place. And when we were looking at the history of the seven churches and the seven seals, we saw how that happened, how paganism was brought into the Christian church, kind of merged with Christianity, and the resulting imperial religion was a mixture of paganism and Christianity. Now, notice the quotes under that, under the heading of the beast. It says, the apostles clearly taught that after they were gone, the church would experience a falling away. Jesus had said, blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you, but woe unto you when all men shall speak well of you. The downfall of the church was the result of the popularity and prestige it gained when, following its legalization in the Roman Empire, it was merged with paganism and became the state religion. Doctrines and customs were introduced that Jesus had never taught. Jesus had said, ye know that the princes of the Gentiles exercise dominion over them, and they that are great exercise authority upon them, but it shall not be so among you. But whosoever will be great among you, let him be your minister, and whosoever will be chief among you, let him be your servant. Even as the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister, and to give his life a ransom for many. But as the church gained imperial authority, men began to grasp for positions of power and influence. So this is just the opposite of what Jesus had said. We should be humble and serve, but now we're seeing men grasp for positions of power and influence. In the contest for highest place, the Bishop of Rome emerged as the head of all the holy churches, as Justinian said in his imperial letter on June 6, 533. When on March 12, 538, the Ostrogoths conceded Rome to the occupying forces, the Bishop of Rome, in the seat of the Caesars, was now the greatest man in the West, and was soon forced to become the political as well as the spiritual head, according to Alexander Flick in his book, The Rise of the Medieval Church. Claiming apostolic succession, the Roman bishopric transformed itself into the medieval papacy, asserting control over all of Europe, its kings and its kingdoms, and even the souls of men. Those who are familiar with history know that no other power during the Middle Ages fits the Revelation 13 description of the beast from the sea. The Roman papacy meets every specification of the prophecy. A parallel description is given in Daniel 7 under the figure of the little horn. So let's go back to some of these Bible texts that describe this power. So back to Revelation chapter 13. We saw the introduction of this beast in the first couple of verses. And then verse 3 says, and I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. So we're going to talk about that in a little while here. Let's skip down to verse 5. It says, and there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle and them that dwell in heaven. Verse 7, and it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. And all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb, slain from the foundation of the world. Okay, so here we see some some characteristics of this power. It would have a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. It would continue 42 months. It would blaspheme God. It would make war with the saints. So let's look at, across the way, there are related Bible passages at the end of that Daniel 7 passage, toward the end of that long quote there. We read down to where it says that it had 10 horns. It was diverse from all the beasts which were before it, and it had 10 horns. And then it says, I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of man, and a mouth speaking great things. Now, in our Daniel seminar, when we talked about this power, we talked about these 3 horns that were uprooted at the time of the rise of the papacy to power. In fact, these 3 kingdoms had to be subdued in order for the Bishop of Rome to gain his supremacy. And so there again we see also that this little horn of Daniel 7 has a mouth speaking great things, which is the very thing that we saw in Revelation 13, verse 5. So the beast of Revelation 13 and this other horn of Daniel 7 they're 2 symbols of the same power, talking about the Roman papacy. Then notice under that in Daniel 7:21, I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them. That's the same thing we saw in Revelation 13:7. It was given unto him to make war with the saints. So again, a parallel description. So let's talk about some of these things. Let's go now to the description here on page 22 about his seat. Okay? The dragon was to give him his power and his seat and great authority. It says the description of the beast in Revelation 13:2 incorporates elements from each of the 4 beasts of Daniel 7. The reference to the dragon would therefore be to Daniel's 4th beast, Rome. The beast's power and his seat and great authority would be given to him by the government of Rome. Regarding the Pope's authority, the Roman Emperor Justinian, in his above-mentioned letter to John II, Bishop of Rome in AD 533, asserted, "We shall exert ourselves in every way, as already has been stated, to increase the honor and authority of your see." It was this letter that, effective upon the Ostrogoths' abandonment of Rome in 538, established the supremacy of the Pope. So, in 538, the Ostrogoths, who were non-Catholic Christians, they did not recognize the Bishop of Rome's authority. They did not subscribe to the Bishop of Rome's imposed creed. They were driven out of Rome. They abandoned their siege of Rome in 538, giving the full control into the Catholic powers. So it says in the next paragraph, the prophecy further specified that the seat of the Pope would be given to him by Rome. A bishop's seat, or cathedra, is the chair or throne that symbolizes his teaching authority in the church. For a bishop to speak ex cathedra, or from the chair, gives his declaration official status. The basilica or church building in which the cathedra is installed is known as a cathedral. The Cathedral of Rome is the St. John Lateran Basilica in the heart of the city. The Pope's official seat is located in the apse of that cathedral. And here's a picture of that seat. This is the Bishop of Rome's cathedra, his seat. And this is in the Cathedral of Rome, which is in the St. John, it's the St. John Lateran Cathedral. Here's a picture inside that cathedral. And there's only one cathedral of Rome. There are other major basilicas, but only one cathedral. And the reason that this one is the cathedral is because the cathedra, or the seat, which represents the bishop's teaching authority, is there behind the high altar, back in this apse, back there is where that seat is. And so that's why this particular building is the seat, and that seat represents his authority. And so the St. John Lateran is part of a palace complex originally belonging to a ruling Roman family from the time of the Republic. The property came into the Emperor Constantine's possession when he married his second wife, Fausta. Constantine then gave the entire complex to the Bishop of Rome. As Roman Catholicism's first church, the Lateran Basilica was dedicated in 324 as its cathedral. The prophecy was fulfilled. The beast had received his seat as a gift from the dragon. So the dragon gave to the beast his seat. And so this is now the seat of the Bishop of Rome. So let's talk about the activities and characteristics of this beast. So in the next section there on page 23, it says his activities. The beast is described as having a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. Blasphemy, according to John 10:33, is when a man positions himself as God. That text, if you look over in the first column on page 22, the second quote there, it says, "The Jews answered him, saying, For a good work we stone thee not, but for blasphemy, and because that thou, being a man, makest thyself God." So for a man to refer to himself or to consider himself God is blasphemy. The next text below it, Luke 5:20 and 21, says, "And when he saw their faith, he said unto them, Man, thy sins are forgiven thee." This is Jesus speaking when he healed the paralytic in Luke 5. So he said to the man, "Thy sins are forgiven thee." And the scribes and the Pharisees began to reason, saying, "Who is this which speaketh blasphemies? Who can forgive sins but God alone?" So for a man to claim to be able to forgive people's sins is blasphemy, according to that text. So Luke 5:20 and 21 calls one's claim to be able to forgive sins blasphemy. The papacy meets both criteria. So reading on page 23 here under his activities. Pope Leo XIII, in his encyclical letter, The Reunion of Christendom, dated June 20, 1894, declared, "We hold upon this earth the place of God Almighty." And from Christopher Marcellus' oration in the Fifth Lateran Council, session 4, in 1512, we read regarding the Pope, "For thou art the shepherd, thou art the physician, thou art the director, thou art the husbandman, finally thou art another God on earth." So the Pope accepts this designation or this title of God. Well, what about the forgiveness of sins part? Regarding the claim to forgive sins, the Catholic Encyclopedia says, "Absolution is the remission of sin or of the punishment due to sin granted by the Church. Absolution proper is that act of the priest whereby in the sacrament of penance he frees man from sin." So the priest's claim the power to free men from sin, to actually forgive their sins. So that is the description there of blasphemy. Now, let's go back and look at another characteristic. So back in Revelation chapter 13, we saw in verse 5 a mouth speaking great things. In verse 6 was blasphemy. The next thing in verse 7 says, and it was given him to make war with the saints. We saw that also in Daniel 7 verse 21, where he was to make war with the saints. So now we're going to go to the next quotation here on page 23. W.E.H. Lecky, in History of the Rise and Influence of the Spirit of Rationalism in Europe, Volume 2, pages 40 to 45, says, and here's an extended quote that I'm going to read from that book. It says, Laurent, who had free access to the archives of the Spanish Inquisition, assures us that by that tribunal alone, more than 31,000 persons were burnt and more than 290,000 condemned to punishments less severe than death. So it's not like they burned somebody to death. They burned 31,000 people to death in the Spanish Inquisition alone. The number of those who were put to death in the Netherlands alone in the reign of Charles V has been estimated by a very high authority at 50,000. And at least half as many perished under his son. And when to these memorable instances we add the innumerable less conspicuous executions that took place, from the victims of Charlemagne to the freethinkers of the 17th century, we recollect that after the mission of Dominique in the area of the persecution comprised nearly the whole of Christendom, and that its triumph was in many districts so complete as to destroy every memorial of that contest, the most callous nature must recoil with horror from the spectacle. Nor did the victims perish by a brief and painless death, but by one which was carefully selected as among the most poignant that man can suffer. This was the physical torment inflicted on those who dared to exercise their reason in the pursuit of truth. When we consider all these things, it can surely be no exaggeration to say that the Church of Rome has inflicted a greater amount of unmerited suffering than any other religion that has ever existed. That's W.E.H. Lecky. So that he would make war with the saints is the absolute truth there that certainly took place. Now, let's go back to another characteristic of this power. Let's go to the top of page 22, Daniel 7, 23 to 25. And we read the first part of this where it talks about the fourth beast would be the fourth kingdom. He would have 10 horns, which represent the 10 kings that would arise. And then it says, another shall arise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. So we talked about that. And then it says, and he shall speak great words against the Most High. That would be his blasphemous statements. And shall wear out the saints of the Most High. That would be his persecution and putting people to death. So wear out the saints of the Most High. And the next thing says, and think to change times and laws. He would think to change times and laws. So that is describing his claim to be able to actually change God's law, because if he's speaking words against God, he's wearing out the saints of God, the times and laws that he would think to change would also be those of God. And we're going to actually talk more about that particular characteristic in a future, actually probably the next, tomorrow night's thing. We're going to talk more specifically about that. So let's go now. Let's see, where should we pick this up? Okay, so the next reference there, or actually we'll continue on that same quote, Daniel 7. It says, "He shall think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time." So a time and times and the dividing of time. Now that's the period of time during which the papacy would hold supremacy. So let's go back to the front page, Revelation chapter 13, and we see in Revelation chapter 13 and verse 5, it says, "There was given him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given him to continue 42 months. So in Revelation 13:5, his period of supremacy is 42 months, and in Daniel 7, verse 25, his period of supremacy is a time and times and the dividing of time. Now to figure that out, we have the math done for you here at the bottom of page 23. And this is actually the most emphasized time prophecy in the Bible. And it's mentioned 7 times in Scripture, and it's referred to in 3 different ways, either a time, times and a half, or 42 months, or 1,260 days. All 3 references are the same. 42 months times 32 days in a month is 1,260 days. A time in Bible prophecy is 1 year, so a prophetic time, using the year-day principle, is 360 prophetic days, or 360 literal years, which is 360 years. So time is 360 years. Times would be twice that, it's plural, so that it's 720, and then a half a time would be 180 prophetic days. And so you add all those up and you come to 1,260 prophetic days, or 1,260 literal years. So 7 places in the Bible, the papacy is described as having a 1,260-year period of supremacy. So let's see how this works out. So if you go to the last page of your folder, the second paragraph there where it says the period began in AD 538 when the Ostrogoths, who had controlled Italy since 493, were forced to surrender Rome to the Eastern general Belisarius. As long as the former capital was under the jurisdiction of the Arian Ostrogoths, the Catholic Bishop of Rome held only limited influence. But with the reconquest of much of the West by the Catholic Byzantines, Justinian's intentions for the Pope's supremacy were realized. So that starts our 1,260 years, 538. So you add 1,260 years to that, it takes us to 1798. So we would expect the papacy to lose its supremacy in 1798. If you go back to Revelation 13 and verse 3, this is that deadly wound we read about. In verse 3 it says, "And I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death." So the papacy would receive a deadly wound, and then later it says the deadly wound would be healed and all the world would wonder after the beast. So this deadly wound is described on page 24 here. It says, on December 28, 1797, a skirmish between a mob of Roman revolutionaries and papal troops at the French ambassador's palace in Rome resulted in the death of the French general Leonard Dufault. The ambassador, Joseph Bonaparte, reported the matter to the Directory and to his brother Napoleon. The result was that on February 10, 1798, a force of 10,000 French soldiers under the command of General Berthier entered Rome. On February 15, the papal government was supplanted by a new Roman Republic, and on February 20, Pope Pius VI was taken into custody and escorted from the city. He died in exile a year and a half later. Bible students around the world recognize in those events of 1798 the deadly wound of Revelation 13:3. And then here's a quote from George Trevor in his book Rome from the Fall of the Western Empire. And notice what he says. It says, the papacy was extinct. This is describing after that capture of the Pope and the elimination of the papal government in 1798, this is what was written about it. The papacy was extinct. Not a vestige of its existence remained. And among all the Roman Catholic powers, not a finger was stirred in its defense. The eternal city had no longer prince or pontiff. Its bishop was a dying captive in foreign lands, and the decree was already announced that no successor would be allowed in his place. Now we know that eventually a successor was elected, and the deadly wound was eventually healed. But for the moment, when this took place in 1798, the Pope had lost his authority. The papacy, the government of the Pope, was no longer. And so that shows us this 42-month period, or times and a half, or 1,260 days, prophetic days is 1,260 years, from when the Ostrogoths withdrew from Rome in 538 until the Pope was taken captive in 1798. That is the period of 1,260 years of papal supremacy. So then we read that the wound would be healed and all the world would wonder after the beast. And so reading on page 24, under the healing of the deadly wound, it says, although gradual over the last 2 centuries, the papacy's recovery has been sure. The prophecy foretold that one day all the world would wonder after the beast. Today, the Pope heads the largest organized religious body in the world, with over 1 billion members, making up approximately 1/6 of the world's population. In his travels, he draws crowds of up to and over 1 million people. He often meets with presidents and world leaders and has addressed the United States Congress and the United Nations General Assembly. He is also a leader in the ecumenical movement, which aims to unify all Christian communions. From its deadly wound in 1798, the papacy has risen to become one of the most influential institutions of any type in the world today. So, he got a deadly wound, his wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. And then Revelation 13 verse 4 says, and they worshiped the dragon which gave power unto the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like unto the beast, and who is able to make war with him? So that's happening. Now, if you go down to verse 10, Revelation 13, verse 10, it says, he that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. So here, the papacy had taken many people into captivity during its period of supremacy, but now the papacy itself would be taken into captivity. He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and faith of the saints. Now in verse 18, there is another identifying mark here that we can look at. Revelation 13, verse 18. It says, "Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast. For it is the number of a man, and his number is 666." So this is the number of the beast, and it's the number of a man, and it's that number 666. And so if you go to the back page once again of your folder, under the number of the beast, the significance of the number 666 dates back to ancient astrology, particularly the solar cult. Magic squares with the numbers 1 to 36 sorted and arranged in 6 rows and columns so that each added up to 111 for a total of 166 denoted the sun. So I looked that up on Wikipedia, these magic squares, and here you can see a number of magic squares. Different ones were divided. And this goes back to the ancient paganism that predates Christianity. This was what the ancient Babylonians, in their cultic worship of the various deities, worshipped. And so you see that the Saturn has 15, which you can add up. Each thing comes to 15. Like 9 and 4 and 2 is 15. 4 and 3 and 8 is 15. So whatever way you add, it comes to 15. Jupiter's number was 34. Those numbers all add up, both horizontally and vertically, all add up to 34. Mars was 65. And here's the sun, Sol. This is the Roman name for the sun god. Its number is 111. So if you add every single one of these rows adds up to 111. Every single one of these columns adds up to 111. So the total 111 times 6 is 666. So this is that magic square that related to the sun. And here Venus has a different number, Mercury, and this is the moon. Luna has a different number. So the sun was the foremost god in pagan times. And so it represented kind of the totality of paganism, because it was all the major deities in each of the pagan nations. The major deity was always the sun. They had minor deities, but the major deity was always the sun. So reading on, the highest priest of the pagan mystery religions stood as the human representative of the sun god, and was thereby identified with the number 666. In Rome, the most influential position in the pagan priesthood was that of the Pontifex Maximus. When in the 4th century, the amalgamation of sun worship and Christianity became the imperial religion, the office of Pontifex Maximus was abandoned by the Emperor Gratian and assumed by the Catholic Bishop of Rome, making him thereafter the sole legitimate successor to the pagan pontificate and all that it represented. That would include an identification with the number 666. So the Pontifex Maximus was the highest priest in the pagan religion. When the Emperor of Rome said, I'm no longer going to hold this position as the high priest in paganism, the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, took the title, and from then on, he has been referred to as the Pontifex Maximus, meaning he is the head of all the pagan religions. And therefore, this number, 666, would be identified with him as the highest priest of those mystery religions. Now, Revelation gives us 4 clues about the mystical number 666. Number 1, it is the number of the beast. We saw that in verse 18. It's the number of the beast. We've identified who the beast is, so this would be the number of the beast. Number 2, the same verse says it is the number of a man. Verse 17 says it is the number of his name. And verse 4 tells us that with understanding one can count the number. So, it is the number of the name of the man who is the beast. Although disputed, a title reflecting this number has been claimed by the Pope. And this is a quote from Our Sunday Visitor, the Catholic publication, and it says, "The Pope claims to be the Vicar of the Son of God. That title in Latin is Vicarius Filii Dei." And that title is quoted by Pope Leo IX in his letter In Terra Pax Hominibus, and carries the numerical value of 666. So if you take the Latin numeral value of each of the letters in that title, V, you know, is 5, I is 1, C is 100. So you add up the numerical value in Roman numerals of that, and it adds up to 666. This is the title that has been recognized by the Pope as a title. It means, this Latin phrase in English means Vicar of the Son of God. That is his title, and the number of the name of the man who is the beast is 666. And so that is how that works out. So we've looked at all of these different characteristics of the beast. We've looked at his persecuting of God's people, his blasphemy, claiming to be God and to forgive sins, which only God can do. We've looked at his period of time that he would reign. We've looked at the number and all of his other activities here. And it's clear that there is only one power that this can be talking about, and that is the Roman Catholic papacy. We're not saying this because we have anything against the man as an individual, but the position that he represents and the role that power has played throughout history was foretold in Bible prophecy, both in the book of Daniel and in the book of Revelation, as a power that is opposed to God's people, opposed to God himself, and opposed to God's truth. So tomorrow night we'll be looking at the subject of the mark of the beast. And so be sure you don't miss tomorrow night's message, because Revelation 13 talks about a mark, as well as Revelation chapter 14 talks about a mark of the beast that individuals receive, and that's a mark that you don't want to have. So you want to know what that is. So as we close, let's bow our heads for prayer. Father in heaven, thank you again that Bible prophecy is clearly played out in history as we look at how it works. And we just want to ask that you'll continue to guide us as we continue to study your word and go through the remainder of this seminar. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.